contention subpoint layout for purposes?
Yeah, sole contention, 2 impacts.
Alright. Would you like ours?
Sure.
Contention, impact, contention, impact.
Alright, cool.
Just watch out.
Alright, you good?
Yeah.
Alright, I'll begin on my first word. My partner Sukhman and I strongly negate result. The United States should substantially reduce its military support of Taiwan. Before we get into our arguments, a few observations. We define military support as the extent to which the U.S. will intervene when a conflict between Taiwan and China occurs. Finally, it's important to establish how this route should be evaluated. Given that a Taiwan invasion would be cataclysmically devastating to geopolitical power, global economy, and human lives, we believe that the side that best protects global peace should win here today. Our sole contention is invasion deterrence. In 1979, President Jimmy Carter signed the Taiwan Relations Act into law, which states that the United States shall maintain the capacity to resist any resort to force or other forms of coercion that would jeopardize the security or social or economic system of the people of Taiwan. The Brookings Institute writes that U.S. military confrontation in an invasion is highly likely, and since the Eisenhower administration, Washington has threatened to use force to defend Taiwan. On many as 6 occasions, when asked, President Joe Biden has indicated an inclination to help defend Taiwan if China were to attack. It's obvious the U.S. is committed to Taiwan's defense. Across the Pacific, Student 24 states that Xi Jinping has made unification of Taiwan the signature issue of his tenure. He now calls it the essence of national rejuvenation. However, given the risk that a failed war could pose to Xi's regime and perhaps his life, the Chinese leader will want a high chance of success if he attacks, according to Brands 23. Since those chances are so low in the status quo because of the possibility of a U.S. war, China is desperate for America to pull out of the region. Selden 24 quotes Liu Pengyu, a spokesperson for the Chinese embassy in Washington, who claimed the U.S. should stop meddling in the Taiwan question and stop creating new factors that could lead to tensions in the Taiwan Strait. Selden crystallizes their apprehension, extending that the U.S. DoD cautioned that Beijing itself believes that it still faces some deficits as it tries to win wars against other capable adversaries. Thus, an affirmative vote erodes the current military status quo that fostered a relationship where, as the USDIA puts it, the cost of armed conflict would outweigh the benefits. Thus, a vote in negation ensures that deterrence. The first impact is preventing Chinese hegemony. Brands 23 writes that the U.S. task in the Western Pacific is to show that any such war will leave China far poorer, weaker, and less politically stable than before. Reducing military presence in Taiwan prevents the completion of said task, as it drastically lowers the likelihood of China having to directly fight the U.S. The results are catastrophic, because as Colby 22 puts it, Taiwan is vital to the defense of Japan, South Korea, and the Philippines. If China occupied Taiwan, it would pose a much greater threat to these countries and be able to project power deep into the Pacific. A vulnerable Taiwan permits Chinese power in the Pacific that would be disastrous for the global power hierarchy. Colby asserts that if China becomes dominant in such a way over Asia, it will have a controlling influence over roughly half the global economy. With this power, it will undoubtedly ensure that it is the center, the prime beneficiary, and effectively the director of the global economy. They write that China will very likely seek to diminish the U.S. This is just basic power politics. America is the only country that can possibly stand up to China. So, to secure its ascendancy, China will seek to weaken and, by extension, impoverish us. An apt ballot sacrifices Taiwan, and it equally sacrifices America's economic and military capabilities. The second impact is preventing an unprecedented economic disaster. The Economist reports that Taiwan produces over 60% of the world's semiconductors and over 90% of the most advanced ones. Sachs 23 writes that the Chinese attack on Taiwan, regardless of its success or whether the U.S. chooses to intervene, would trigger a cataclysmic global depression, shaving trillions off the global economy through supply chain distribution. Bloomberg Economics crystallizes the price tag, 10 trillion, equal to about 10% of global GDP. For reference, according to the Fed, the 2008 financial crisis saw a reduction of 4.3 reduction in global GDP. That crisis, according to Reuters in 2009, pushed 90 million people into poverty, less than half as severe as Taiwan invasion projections. It would categorically devastate the entire world, barring China, who alone takes the throne as the world's paramount economic superpower. The only way to prevent hundreds of millions from being plunged into poverty is to vote neg and protect Taiwan. Thank you.
Is anybody not ready? I'll begin my first one. My partner, Adeline, and I affirm the resolution which states, resolved, the United States should substantially reduce its military support of Taiwan. As Affirmative Incorporated defines it, military support refers to the assistance provided by armed forces to enhance the capabilities of allied nations or groups during conflicts or crises, which is the definition we will use today for the remainder of this round. This leads to our first contention, Taiwan's economic strength. Taiwan's status as a global leader in semiconductor production provides it with immense economic leverage that serves as a deterrent against Chinese aggression. This economic advantage is far more sustainable and impactful than relying on U.S. military support, which only serves to escalate tension in the region by antagonizing China. By removing aid from Taiwan, since they are economically strong due to their semiconductors, they will remain so despite removing this aid. This will help reduce economic reliance on China. According to The Economist in 2023, Taiwan produces over 60% of the world's semiconductors and over 90% of the most advanced ones. This leads to our first impact, which is a negation of Chinese invasion. Taiwan being a leading semiconductor producer is critical in global tech industries, including China's rapidly growing economy. In the AF world, removing U.S. military aid creates an environment where Taiwan's economic interdependence with China becomes a stabilizing factor rather than a point of contention. A military conflict would severely disrupt global supply chains, leading to worldwide inflation and economic instability, something that China, a country that emphasizes economic growth, would refrain from doing. Bando 23 states that Taiwan's dominant semiconductor manufacturing is unlikely to survive a war, and that the product can be manufactured elsewhere with sufficient investment. Taiwan's semiconductor industry is unlikely to survive a war in an invasion scenario. China wouldn't gain access to these fabrication facilities. Instead, other global facilities would ramp up production to fill in the gaps. Contention 2, pressing U.S. commitments. The U.S. is currently overextended, with substantial military and financial commitments in Europe, supporting Ukraine against Russian aggression, the Middle East, monitoring Iran's nuclear ambitions and maintaining stability in the Indo-Pacific. By scaling back military aid in Taiwan, the U.S. can prioritize its resources towards higher stakes or immediate challenges that align more closely with its strategic interests. From Council on Foreign Relations in 2024, the total budget authority under these bills, the headline figure, often cited by news media, is $175 billion total for Ukraine alone. Overall military aid ranges from $50 billion to $70 billion annually. By mitigating Taiwanese expenditures as well, roughly $2 million yearly, the United States can focus on what is our sole impact, which is reallocation. According to the Department of Defense, readiness levels for U.S. forces have decreased due to the simultaneous demands of multiple theaters. Reducing military aid in Taiwan would allow the U.S. to redirect its focus and resources to regions where American influence and interests are most at risk. The Heritage Foundation from 2024 states that we must sizably cut the foreign aid budget because, unfortunately, foreign aid budgets have grown so large that our federal agencies can no longer fulfill their management and oversight duties to prevent waste, fraud, and abuse of taxpayer funds. Resources saved from reducing military support in Taiwan can be reinvested in the modernization of U.S. military capabilities or domestic programs, ensuring long-term competitiveness and resilience in a rapidly changing global landscape. The funds can also be reallocated to other government programs that have been neglected due to this excessive aid. At the end of the day, it boils down to the fact that Taiwan is not in need of our military aid, and by reducing it substantially, the U.S., you and me, would be better off today.
All right. As first speaker, may I have first question?
Yep.
All right. So you brought up in your first contention that that when we reduce U.S. military support, it appeases tensions between Taiwan and China, right?
Yep.
Could you explain how that happens?
Yeah, so basically right now, with China's presence on that border, it's signifying to China that we are advocating for Taiwan independence, which is only facilitating conflict with China because China feels like they own Taiwan, and having the U.S. presence there signals that we disagree with them, and that creates conflict.
Right, but wouldn't you agree that look, we look at our evidence right now? China is ramping up support. They're protecting their economy from a future war, and the only thing right now that's there to prevent that from happening is the U.S. So wouldn't you say that when we take away that support, China invades Taiwan?
No, I wouldn't. They're supporting the economy because that's what they prioritize. China, since for the past
No, I'm not saying that they're just supporting the economy because I can bring up the evidence later, but it is massive undertakings taken by their government that has said that taking Taiwan is the only thing they want, that it's their sole issue in their regime. If it's their sole issue in their regime, then how would taking U.S. support out of Taiwan appease those tensions? If that's exactly what they want to do, that they've written down.
My answer is the same. I think their strengthening of the economy shows that they care about the economy more than Taiwan. But can I get a question here? So I want to ask you, why should it be the U.S.'s priority to maintain global peace when we have more pressing issues in our homeland?
Right, but what we brought up in our second impact was that when we take away the support, again, we can prove that China will invade Taiwan. And when that happens, we see a $10 trillion reduction in the global economy. When that happens, we see hundreds of millions of people plunge into poverty. I can bring up more evidence of our military being hurt from that, our military, medicine, AI capabilities, all of those rely on the semiconductor industry that's based in Taiwan. And when China invades Taiwan, the U.S. doesn't get any of that.
We would tell you right now that the U.S. Being on that border is going to try to pressure both Taiwan and the United States more, which is going to lead to that conflict.
Wait, what do you mean? Okay, you said pressure?
Yeah, it's going to create conflict there, which could devastate that semiconductor industry. So the impact is the same on both sides, if you want to argue that.
Okay, can I have a question?
Yep.
So in your second contention, you talk about how we're going to reallocate these funds, right?
Yeah.
So could you tell me why the impact of those reallocations would be greater than the hundreds of millions of lives we save when we support Taiwan?
Yeah, sure. So with that, the thing is we don't know for sure that conflict will happen. We have pressing issues in our homeland that we don't have the funds for right now.
Right.
Because we're allocating so much of our money to foreign military conflict, where we should be investing in these programs at home, which better benefit our citizens.
I'm going to take some prep time starting now. Is anybody not ready? This debate comes down to one key question. What happens if the United States substantially reduces its military support for Taiwan? We argue that doing so would be a strategic mistake with serious global consequences. Military support isn't about weapons or troops. It's about signaling unwavering commitment, upholding international credibility, and maintaining peace through strength. Weakening that support doesn't lead to peace. It signals retreat, emboldens authoritarian aggression, and invites conflict. This is why we firmly negate the resolution. Let's start with their first contention: Taiwan's economic strength and semiconductor dominance. And we have 3 key points on this. First, their own evidence contradicts them. Banda 23, cited by the Affirmative, admits that Taiwan's chip factories would not survive in a war. So if conflict breaks out, Taiwan's economic deterrent disappears instantly. Their argument assumes peace, but if the U.S. pulls back, war becomes far more likely and the entire foundation of their argument crumbles. Second, China does not act as a purely rational economic actor. Beijing has repeatedly shown a willingness to bear economic costs for political goals. From zero COVID policies to crackdowns on tech firms, Taiwan is a political red line for China, central to its national rejuvenation. Microchips will not stop missiles, only credible military deterrence will. Third, the real deterrent is a U.S. military presence. Rand's 23-year report, Can Taiwan Resist a Large-Scale Attack?, finds that U.S. intervention is necessary to deter or defeat a Chinese attack, and remains a single most significant factor preventing invasion. Remove that presence, and the threat of U.S. action disappears, and so does peace. And now moving on to their second contention, that the U.S. is overcommitted and should relocate military resources, we again have 3 strong points. First, deterrence is far cheaper than war. The Center for Strategic and International Studies, CSIS, highlights that over $2.4 trillion in global trade passes through the Taiwan Strait, and a conflict there would cause trillions in supply chain collapse, military mobilization, and global economic devastation. Second, the relocation claim is misleading. Analysts at the Cato Institute and elsewhere confirm that cutting foreign aid or military support rarely results in better domestic spending, and instead, these funds often disappear into federal bureaucracies or deficit reduction. So, the affirmative promise that money saved from Taiwan support will help domestic programs is simply unrealistic. And third, withdrawing support damages U.S. credibility and emboldens adversaries. If the U.S. abandons Taiwan, allies like Japan, South Korea, and NATO will doubt our commitments. Global affairs research shows that U.S. strength in Taiwan maintains peace across the Indo-Pacific by demonstrating reliable deterrence. Weakness in one region invites instability everywhere. Now reflecting on our own constructive case, the affirmative is going to come up here and paint you a picture on how presence provokes conflict. But rather the opposite is true. Strong U.S. posture prevents aggression. As Rand's strategic analysis makes clear, Taiwan isn't just a small island. It produces over 90% of advanced semiconductors. It produces 90% of the world's advanced semiconductors, and critical to global technology and innovation. If China takes Taiwan, the global tech economy will collapse. And our military support protects not just democracy, but the future of innovation and economic stability. The affirmative case rests on hope that China will act rationally, that economics alone will deter missiles, and that cutting military support won't signal weakness. But hope isn't a strategy. Our case offers clear deterrence, proven results from RAND and CSIS, and the world order preserved through strength. That is why we urge a strong vote in negation. Thank you.
Okay. Is anyone not ready? First, I'm going to be arguing my opponent's case, and if time allows, I will be revisiting our case. You're not my first. Let's start with their first sole contention that discusses Chinese invasion. Our opponents argue that the current U.S. military support measures have deterred powers from invading thus far, specifically China, and removing that support compromises that deterrence, leaving Taiwan susceptible to an inevitable invasion, but this is not a valid argument. As China's determination of military might grow, the status quo has become unattainable. Look at this quote. Xi Jinping told Biden that China would not be satisfied with the status quo forever. Look, peace is all well and good, but at some point we need to move forward towards resolution more generally, according to the Washington Post in 2023. The argument that invasion won't happen in the neg world just because an invasion hasn't happened yet is fraudulent, because it's obvious that their precious status quo is boiling over. Sukhman 24 writes that Xi has undertaken massive efforts to insulate the Chinese economy from potential external vulnerabilities, stressing self-reliance at the expense of growth through measures like purchasing gold and reducing foreign exchange exposures. Efforts to boost food and energy security are well underway, and China is building pipelines and coal-fired plants in anticipation of limiting the impact of expected foreign maritime interdiction of oil and gas during the conflict. These measures would also help shockproof China from sanctions stemming from a Taiwan conflict. The idea that status quo is permanently preventing war is absolutely ludicrous, because even U.S. military officials know that China is priming their forces and their economy for an invasion. All of the crises my opponents say prevent easily happen in their world too. Rendering these impacts is non-unique, meaning that your vote has no bearing on whether or not these impacts are actually realized. We can even flip this and move it to our side. Welling 24 writes that U.S. military support is actually antagonizing China and increasing the likelihood of invasion. China Foreign Ministry spokesperson Wang Webin says that assistance will only increase tensions and the risk of conflict across the Taiwan Strait. A China spokesperson for the mainland Taiwan Affairs Office said that aid violates U.S. commitments to China and sends a wrong signal to the Taiwan Independent Separate Forces. They are saying they're saving lives when they support Taiwan, but this is not true. We need to prioritize the lives of America and helping our own people, and also Taiwan, benefiting everyone's citizens. In rebuttal, they further affirmed our evidence that semiconductors in Taiwan would not survive. So let's move on to this argument about semiconductors. The little things are in all of our devices today. The next side argues that removing U.S. involvement will destroy the market and lead to the ground of China gaining a monopoly. However, Taiwan Semiconductor is unlikely to survive a war. In an invasion scenario, China wouldn't gain access to these fabrication facilities. Instead, other global facilities would ramp up production to fill in the gaps. As stated in our constructive, Taiwan's dominant semiconductor is unlikely to survive a war. Therefore, China is not going to start a war if they are going to be risking their economic profits. In rebuttal, they further affirmed our evidence that semiconductors in Taiwan would not survive. Now let's move on to their point about undermining U.S. credibility if the U.S. pulled out of Taiwan, and let's look over why this would not be the case. Rogan 24 reports that under its longstanding policy of strategic ambiguity, the United States has discretion on whether or not they can invade Taiwan. Our case tells you that we should eliminate the possibility of defending Taiwan as a whole because presidential rhetoric has indicated that we would. But in terms of explicit commitments, the United States doesn't have one. That means that the U.S. doesn't set a precedent of falling to honor defense commitments as the status quo gives us an option. That's entirely different than our relationships with Pacific allies like the Japan or the Philippines, who have an explicit legal obligation to defend. There are no parallels between the situation, and thus affirmation does not foster any mistrust between us, our allies, or dampen our credibility on a global scale. Now let's move on and revisit our case. We believe that the United States should substantially reduce its military support of Taiwan, as Taiwan's economic strength provides a more sustainable and effective deterrent against Chinese aggression. Taiwan is a global leader in the semiconductor production, manufacturing 60% of the world's semiconductors and 90% of the advanced ones, giving it an economic leverage. This economic interdependence, especially with China, fosters stability, as a military conflict would disrupt global supply chains and harm China's economy, deterring invasion. Additionally, the United States is overextended with military and financial obligations in Europe, Ukraine, the Middle East, and other regions, spending to 50 to 70 billion annually on foreign aid alone. They argue, by prioritizing Taiwan's economic resilience and reallocating U.S. resources, both nations would benefit from a more stable and strategic approach. Judge, we urge a vote in affirmation to prefer economic stability. Thank you.
All right. So how do you recounsel your claim that Taiwan's economy deters China with Xi Jinping's repeated statements that unification with Taiwan is a core priority, regardless of cost?
Well, we're specifically stating that if we were to take our forces out of Taiwan, it's going to have a better relationship with China, and therefore there is not going to be a military invasion, so the semiconductor industry is perfectly fine. If there was an invasion, like you state in your neg world, then that semiconductor industry is going to fall to the ground, and everyone needs that because, like you said, it's an important part of our economy today.
Okay.
All right, so should we be going off of, actually, no, I'm not gonna use that question. So why would China risk a war with Taiwan if their semiconductor industry would be at risk? Let's just go off of that.
China is not risking a war with Taiwan, or, wait, so basically, can you restate the question? China's
Why would China risk a war with Taiwan if they know it's going to be detrimental to the semiconductor industry?
It's not risking a war with Taiwan. It's not just about economy. It's also about taking Taiwan itself. And what we see is that the U.S. is bringing military support to Taiwan because of China with aggression. We've already mentioned this in our case, and I've already stated this in the rebuttal, because of the aggression that China has. And if we do reduce military support from Taiwan, then that's only going to show that our U.S. deterrence, and it's going to create like unstable peace globally.
All right. Next question.
All right, yeah. So, if the U.S. substantially reduces military support, China's likelihood of invading Taiwan would increase, or no? You disagree?
Yeah, if we take out our military support, I believe that the conflict would de-escalate.
Okay, so then how can you explain on how would reducing deterrence, how it wouldn't embolden China?
We're not reducing deterrence because China doesn't want us in Taiwan. That is why they're aggressive towards us. Like, we can both agree that we're not allies with China right now, and if we are keeping our troops and our funding within Taiwan, it's just going to anger China even more because they don't want us there. Taking it away is more of a statement of peace, and it wouldn't undermine our credibility either because we don't have an explicit commitment to uphold.
Okay.
All right. Do you have evidence regarding the United States saying that they are wanting to stick with Taiwan, or any actual thing that legally binds us?
Well, I mean, they've already been with Taiwan for over 70 years, so I mean, why wouldn't they want to stick with Taiwan? If them leaving now would just mean that it's going to be unstable peace. It's just going to show unfair commitment to the Indo-Pacific with, as I mentioned, NATO, Japan, South Korea. They're all going to see U.S. as not as a legal commitment because they're reducing military support to Taiwan and risking it in invasion.
But even if they're doing that and prioritizing global safety because they're de-escalating conflict with China, why wouldn't pulling out show that we are a peaceful force?
It's not de-escalating safety, it's rather increasing the safety because U.S. support in Taiwan is rather increasing the safety because it's deterring China from wanting to do anything economically.
But that's exactly where you're wrong. It's not deterring China. We are already at high tension with them, and staying there is just escalating those tensions even more in this time.
Okay, that's fine.
Alright, is anyone ready? Alright, I'm gonna begin on my first word. This whole case boils down to whether or not war happens in the status quo, and let's look at what really happens. Their first contention was that Taiwan is economically beneficial, with their first impact being the negation of this Chinese invasion. But this invasion only happens in their world. The Washington Post in 2023 reports that Xi Jinping literally said, look, peace is all well and good, but at some point we need to move towards resolution more generally. Don't let the app tell you that taking out support will magically make China decide not to invade. China is literally telling you they don't want peace. Additionally, appeasement never works with egotistical dictators. China is the aggressor in this situation. Giving them assurances will only embolden their revisionist actions. Code 24 writes that offering concessions to a determined revisionist such as Beijing will only invite further aggression. Instead, clear red lines reinforced by credible threats of unacceptable pain are needed. Additionally, our student card explains, Xi is making efforts to invade Taiwan, and it is the U.S.'s responsibility and duty to its own citizens and those around the world. It's a signature issue of their tenure. We clearly see that the only thing preventing invasion from China is the U.S. support present. Their second contention was that their oppressing U.S. commitments to other countries and reducing Taiwanese support would allow the money to be reallocated. Our first point was that deterrence is far cheaper than war. With some minor exceptions, Taiwan pays for its own military equipment and weapons. Supporting Taiwan actually makes money for the U.S. In fact, Taiwan pays for these weapons in advance. But we should also look at the fact that the money spent on Taiwan is only a fraction of the U.S. military budget. Now, to summarize why a neg ballot is correct. Our first contention was invasion deterrence. In response to this, they cite you our own student card, telling you that China is doing everything in their power to prepare for war. They are ready for it, but the only thing preventing it is the U.S. military. And our London 23 card summarizes how the U.S. would be able to defend Taiwan if invasion occurs. And therefore, we must maintain the support that has been able to deter China for decades. If you buy into their fear-mongering, we are left in a world where China has easy access to Taiwan. Additionally, voting neg prevents Chinese hegemony. Failing to defend Taiwan would have severe repercussions for U.S. credibility. Finally, it's important to vote for our side to avoid an unprecedented economic disaster. The geostrategic importance of chips cannot be overstated. They're absolutely crucial for military, medicine, and AI. They tell you that these chips are lost in a war, and that's exactly why we maintain a support. War happens in their world, and we lose those chips. Now let's talk about legal obligation as well. They define military support the same as ours, that it's the commitment to help in an armed conflict and the help we provide when that occurs. By this definition, when you make the vote, you are giving that obligation to support Taiwan. It doesn't have to be legally binding. The hypotheticals brought up during Crossfire are unimportant because the actions taken by these countries depend on your vote. It's clear from examining evidence from both sides of the argument that ours have a more direct impact protecting global peace and the lives of millions around the world. It comes down to a mantra as old as time. If it ain't broke, don't fix it.
All right, I'll begin with my first word. I'm going to start by defending my own case, and then I'll be moving on to my opponent's case. So, on our side, we believe that this comes down to three very important issues. The first is Chinese aggression. Now, both sides clash on the issue of whether or not Chinese aggression decreases or increases if we remove our troops. However, we would cite to you the Welly 24 card that my opponent brings up in rebuttal that specifically says that Chinese aggression will increase if we take our troops out. Now, in their last summary speech, they told you once again that China is actively looking to not be peaceful. Now, they tell you that this is because, and they tell you that we are acting as the deterrent to that. But Xi Jinping said himself that they are actively looking in the status quo where the United States is there right now. They are looking to break down this barrier of peace. This proves that this Chinese aggression does exist right now, regardless of the U.S. presence or not. They further tell you in that summary speech that if China ever did invade, well, then the United States could protect Taiwan. However, this directly contradicts their own framework of global peace because at that point they are creating conflict because once again, the U.S. presence is contributing to this global conflict, which obviously would be much larger if the U.S. and US was fighting China than if China was fighting Taiwan. Now, our second key point is economic interdependence, which is why we believe that China will be less aggressive towards Taiwan when we remove our troops. Now, we tell you multiple times that the semiconductor industry will be destroyed in a conflict with China, and that's China's main priority when taking over Taiwan. So it doesn't make sense for them to seek out a war where they are destroying the one thing that they are actually looking to gain through Taiwan. Now, they also tell you that reallocation. That's the wrong point. I just want to kind of say here that we can't rely solely on this economic interdependence being flawed when we see that the semiconductor industry is being destroyed. Now, lastly is overextension of the U.S. So the thing here is that they tell you that we're profiting off these Taiwanese expenditures. We tell you in our case that's not true. We're losing a few $1 million. They tell you that's minute. However, we still tell you it's money that could be going to our homeland. Further on, they tell you that it would weaken our alliances. However, this is not true because what we see is that there are 12 countries that officially recognize Taiwan as a state, or as a nation. Now, what this says is that other countries are in the same boat that we are. They will not blame us for taking troops out of Taiwan because they don't have troops there. Japan can't be mad at us for taking away military support when they aren't providing their military support to Taiwan. Thank you.
All right, as first speaker, can we get first question?
Yes.
All right, I'll begin on my first word. So let's talk about a big point of this debate, which is whether or not China is going to invade Taiwan if the U.S. takes up support, right? And we talked about this deterrence factor that our current military support has. So how can you possibly say that China will not invade Taiwan when they've been prepping for war the past couple of years, when they've literally told the U.S. to stop meddling in Taiwan and get out because stop meddling in the Taiwan question?
That's exactly what you just said. China is telling the United States stop meddling in Taiwan and
Why
get out
don't they
because
tell
are
us to
providing.
stop meddling unless they want to come in? The only thing
Because they do. That's what we're saying. We're saying that they're
So you're
going
saying
to
that
come in. They're going to come in regardless if the U.S. is there or not. That's what we're saying.
What?
We're saying that this conflict
No, wait, okay, so
is starting when the U.S. is there right now.
Right, so in all of your previous speeches, you talked about how China won't come in after the U.S. takes out their support because they're scared of destroying these ships. So now you're saying that they are going to come in anyway?
What we're saying is it's more likely. Obviously, it's a hypothetical argument. We can't be sure that they won't come in, but we're saying it's more likely right now because we see China preparing for war in the status quo with the United States presence there. So that's
and in the
signifying that
status quo, war hasn't happened. But what we have seen, what we have seen from this Chinese dictator Xi Jinping, from his defense aides, we have seen them telling the U.S. to stop meddling because they want them to get out. So it's an easy. They get easy access.
They
to
want
Taiwan.
them to stop meddling because if they keep meddling, it's just going to aggravate China's aggression towards
Right,
the
right,
U.S.
right.
They're going to invade. All right. So you state that the money and troops we provide, we get back from Taiwan. Is this anything as large as the $20 to $30 billion we put in foreign aid annually?
Yeah, so that $20 to $30 billion, spending that now is so much better than losing trillions of dollars in the long run because of some sort of, as you already said, hypothetical argument of China wanting to invade Taiwan. But what we see is that spending that money now, that $20 billion, and saving trillions of dollars that go through the global trade of the Taiwan Strait is so much better to do right now.
But even though we're spending all of this money, we have the highest military deficit over any country in this entire world. Why are we putting so much money into foreign aid and not seeing many results?
Because it's a democratic country. Why else would we support a democratic country?
Again, let's talk about the definition of this resolution. What we're saying when we affirm this resolution is that the U.S. is going to come to the support of Taiwan when a conflict occurs. And from that stems the rest of our argument, saying that because the U.S. has this, but when you make your votes, we see that the U.S. will support Taiwan.
But it's not even a legal obligation for us to support
Right.
Taiwan.
We
There's
don't-
no
it
one
doesn't-
saying boo if we leave.
Right. It doesn't need to concern legal as for us.
How much cost did you use?
I didn't use it. I didn't use it.
You're using prep. I'll just use the rest now. Alright, so a quick reminder before I begin, I'm going to go through my three key voter issues in today's debate, and then a bigger picture on why we won the debate. Alright? History is watching us, In moments like this, the choices we make don't just shape policy, they shape the future of peace and security around the world. The question of whether the United States should substantially reduce its military support to Taiwan was answered, as our case proves that pulling back is not only reckless, it's dangerous. Let's break down 3 key voter issues and prove why we want the debate. Our first key voter issue is on deterrence and security. We showed that Taiwan's economic strength alone cannot keep the peace. War doesn't wait for economies to recover. It destroys them. What actually stops conflict is credible military support, and our evidence made it clear. U.S. military presence is the strongest shield against aggression. Without it, Taiwan is exposed and the fragile balance in the Indo-Pacific shatters. We have not seen a war because of the U.S. deterrence, and reducing support is only going to raise that aggression. Our second key voter issue is on the cost and global trust. We demonstrated that the cost of reducing support is far greater than the budget savings. Losing Taiwan means trillions in economic damage, lost lives, and most importantly, shattered trust among allies. The world watches how the U.S. keeps its promises and retreat now, and that trust breaks, leaving America isolated and weaker. Our third key voter issue is on the relocation illusion. The affirmative promises that cutting aid to Taiwan will free resources for more urgent challenges, but our case shows that readiness problems persist and won't be fixed by cutting support here. Instead, reducing aid signals retreat and weakness, undermining U.S. interests in the Indo-Pacific and globally. But now, let's take a look at the bigger picture outside of one nation. This debate isn't just about Taiwan's future, it's about the future of global order and democracy. If the U.S. pulls out back now, it sends a signal to adversaries that America's word cannot be trusted. Peace and prosperity rely on credible deterrence, and weakening that deterrence threatens millions beyond Taiwan. So judge, this round is about the role of the U.S. plays in protecting peace, defending democracy, and standing by its word. And as Aadit said in his summary, and this is how your ballot is going to come down to, is a mantra as old time: if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Thank you.
I'm going to take some prep time. Starting now. Is everyone ready? Start on my first word. Judge, today the debate boils down to 2 main voter issues: the enhancement of the economy and the enhancement of the American people and those beyond. First, the American people. Our opponents argue that current U.S. military support measures have deterred powers from invading thus far, specifically China, and removing that support compromises that deterrence, leaving Taiwan open for an easy invasion. But we prove to you today that that is not a valid argument. As seen from our various sources, without military involvement from the United States, we are taking a stance on global peace. They stated that China is ready to invade Taiwan by 2027, but they fail to recognize that this is happening in their world regardless of U.S. support. This is because China mobilizing its country and economy for war, and we are aggravating them by staying put, as something my opponents affirmed in Grand Crossfire. By pulling out of Taiwan, we can further invest in our people and our country and put those billions of dollars in military spending and to increase our programs. Now let's shift on to the second key voter issue about the economy. The next side argues removing U.S. involvement will destroy the market and lead to the ground of China taking over. But as we have argued and proved time and time again, this is simply not true. If China acted by invading Taiwan, then the industry would be decimated, harming themselves and the global economy, something that they failed to refute. They will not invade if we remove troops. They will take action if we stay. This goes further with undermining U.S. credibility. If the United States pulled out of Taiwan, we have no legal obligation to stay in Taiwan, such as Japan or the Philippines. The countries in the world will not frown upon us, so this point does not stand. Taiwan isn't recognized by many countries, therefore removing our support is fine, which they also fail to combat in their arguments. This has no reflection on our country image, and let's be real, our image isn't good at the moment anyway. So, Judge, it is clear that you need to vote in affirmation today. We have proven that Taiwan will not be taken over by China or any other force for that matter because of their economic prowess and China's previous statements along with their vast semiconductor industry. We have proven that without the United States, Taiwan will stand and Taiwan will stand strong. The affirmative rule is promoting Taiwan's strength and economic stability. It's proposing allocation of funds to other places and ensuring the safety of thousands around the world. It is for these reasons you need to vote AF today. Thank you.